The Taoiseach and the representatives of the Irish government must take note of what's happening in France. You know, this is one of the biggest countries, obviously, in Europe, and a massive tide of protest has taken place. The Yellow Vest movement is an inspirational revolt by working people and the poor against the President of the rich, Emmanuel Macron, and his policies. And these protests showed that these policies can be challenged. Austerity has wreaked havoc in French society. The struggle to make ends meet is now an epidemic. The Socialist Party and our sister organisation, Gauche Revolutionnaire, support these movements against anti-working class policies. To give you some quotes from people taking part in the protests, a young restaurant worker on a minimum wage said, "I didn't eat yesterday or at last night's dinner." Another, "We Yellow Vests represent the poor of France, those with modest or low incomes who are being crushed." And another, "I'm here for all those people left crying by the 15th of each month because they've gone into the red." And that is what has happened because of austerity policies in France and across the EU. The movements have seen blockades, militant occupations and weekly protests in every major town and city. And we've seen important industrial action as well. Protests involving young people, school students, university students have been met with vicious and brutal state repression, exemplified by the shocking images on social media of over 140 young people forced to kneel in front of the police with their arms behind their back, their only crime protesting outside their school. That's children and what is being done by Macron and his police force. Now, this protest movement has also linked with environmental protests and movements against violence against women, which we saw the weekend before last. The policies of Macron's terror regime are being imposed across Europe and the globe as well, as has been mentioned about in Egypt, the sale of yellow vests being banned in case there's contagion. And the mood that exists in France exists in many other countries in Europe as well, and in Ireland. And when elected in May 2017, Macron was the shiny new face of neoliberalism. The Taoiseach went out of his way to emulate him and has gone head over heels to bask in his radiance. Trudeau, Macron, Varadkar, etc. But there's a warning here for the Taoiseach. Support for Macron has plummeted. He's now one of the most hated presidents in French history. This is a millionaire, a former banker who represents a system built on maintaining inequality and an undermining of living standards of working-class people in the interests of profit. One Yellow Vest protester correctly characterised the concessions that Macron, when he came out of hiding after a week, was forced to concede, putting plasters on a third-degree burn. And they know much more can be won. The idea of tous ensemble, everyone together, has become the sentiment in French society, and there's a huge willingness to fight and to get organised. And we need action committees to be brought together from the workplaces, from the schools, from the Yellow Vest protests to discuss and to organise this struggle and this campaign. As we saw in May 50 years ago, due to its economic power and its traditions, the organised working class and trade union movement in France has a crucial role to play. The day of action on the 14th, called by the CGT, is a step forward, but we need a 24-hour general strike to put a stop to the Macron government and to force them to go much further. A system run for private profit means a further squeezing of living standards. It's essential that this movement unites all working class people of all colours, regardless of background. Any racist or any anti-immigrant sentiment needs to be stood against. To make these demands a reality, we need a government of the working class that ends the rule of the CAC Caron, the major banks and industries that dominate the French economy, the parasites who Macron represents. They should be taken out of private ownership of the profiteers and placed in public ownership under democratic control of working people. An economy planned for the needs of the majority, not run for economic elites. A struggle for a socialist France can open a struggle for a socialist Europe, uniting working class people in opposition to the rule of the bosses and the EU that represents them. And I just want to take up the situation with regard to Brexit, because the referendum vote, we should remind ourselves, for withdrawal from Europe in 2016 was another manifestation of the widespread alienation from the political parties that have pushed neoliberal policies for 3 decades. The majority of those who voted for Brexit were angry at years of austerity that resulted in falling living standards and cuts in public services. They were fed up being told that the pain must be shared when their pockets were being picked to bail out the banks. And now Theresa May has pulled a vote for the draft Brexit agreement at the 11th hour and faces, obviously, the sack herself. But solidarity, and the Socialist Party understands and shares the anger of ordinary people across Europe. France is in turmoil. The Brexit deal is stuck for related reasons. The system simply can't deliver for working people, and it can't deliver democratic rights either. And anger and alienation are widespread, and unexpected referendum results and burning barricades in Paris are simply, a manifestation of this. Now, during the referendum campaign, the RMT Rail Workers Union in Britain and the public sector union NIPSA in the north both took principled positions of opposition to the EU and in favour of a left alternative. These unions have shown the way, and if the trade unions were now to bring their combined weight behind a movement for a new Europe organised in the interests of the 99%, then millions could be mobilised across these islands and across Europe. And it isn't just a question of the trade unions organising to protect jobs and terms and conditions of working people. The union movement in Ireland actually has a proud record of uniting working class people, Catholic and Protestant, and has a historic responsibility to act now with resolution in the interests of working people across the island. The unions must mobilise to counter any measures that result in an increase in sectarian division in the north, and there must be no hardening of borders north, south, east or west.